In this video, I'm going to cover a topic that we unfortunately didn't get to on the live show today, and it has to do with the results of one of the WikiLeaks emails that's been leaked, and claims by the Trump campaign and many online conservatives that it is evidence that the polls are being rigged. Now, that evidence could be out there, but oversampling, which is the term that we're going to talk about in this particular video, is not evidence of it. And so the email in question is a January 2008 exchange between Democratic strategists and employees of the Atlas Project, a political polling and data firm that was being used in one of the Democratic campaigns. Now, this was released in one of the batches of emails from the Podesta emails leaks, and immediately this is one of the things that Donald Trump leaped on. And so he was recently at a rally and he said this: WikiLeaks shows how Clinton campaign chairman John Podesta rigged the polls by oversampling Democrats, a voter suppression technique. And that's happening to me all the time. When the polls are even, when they leave them alone and do them properly, I'm leading. But you see these polls where they're polling Democrats, how's Trump doing? Oh, he's down. They're polling Democrats. And so he believes that he's found evidence of the fact that John Podesta or his employees were rigging the polls against him. Doesn't actually turn out that that's the case. Now, there's a couple of reasons why that's not the case. One, this email was released in 2008. That's when it was originally sent. So, no, it has absolutely nothing to do with Donald Trump. Donald Trump was not running for president at that point. Nobody had any good reason to believe that Donald Trump would be running for president at that point. So, time-wise, that's one reason it's not evidence the polls are rigged against Trump. Two, this was for internal polls. These were not for publicly released polls that anyone would see. These were for polls inside of a campaign. And so that's another reason why it had nothing to do with Trump or convincing anyone that a Republican was doing worse than they actually were. Now, yes, it's not impossible for an internal poll to be leaked by a campaign, but nobody considers internal polls to be as credible as polls actually done by a reputable polling organization, whether private or a college or university or something like that. Now, there's another reason why this is not evidence of the polls being rigged, and that has to do with what oversampling actually is. Now, oversampling sounds bad. If you simply hear it and you don't know about polling, you might imagine that what it means is that they are going to take a group and they're going to put more of it into the sample than actually exists. And if you were to do that, then yes, the poll would not actually be accurate. You would not be able to take from that poll anything about the population at large. But that is not at all what oversampling is. Now, I can understand why so many conservatives have written articles about oversampling and gotten this wrong, because it's extremely difficult to Google the term oversampling and find out inside of 60 seconds what the term actually means, but hopefully one or two of them are watching, and so I will explain it for them now. So, the technical term for oversampling is stratified disproportionate sampling, but most do use oversampling as a shorthand. It is done not to skew the polls, but to gauge the attitudes of specific demographic groups who would not be a statistically large enough group to analyze if sampled randomly. Now, I'm going to do an example by the numbers and then explain it a little bit more. For example, and by the way, this example is provided by PolitiFact, but it checks out. In a national sample of 1,000 eligible voters, only 12.5% or 125 would be African American if you were to do this purely randomly. To accurately gauge black attitudes on certain issues, a pollster may oversample 500 black eligible voters, which would in this case be 4 times more than the random sample. But they don't stop there. No, in analyzing the full sample, the sample of blacks would be assigned a weight of 0.25 to represent the overall population. Here's the reason. If you only communicate with a small group of people, if a subset of that group is even smaller, then there's some chance that it will not be representative. You could, for instance, talk to a couple of people inside of this community that are not like the rest, either in socioeconomic status or educational attainment or their age or something like that. To make sure that what you get is actually representative, you get a larger overall group that has a lower margin of error. Then you weight it appropriately to make sure that the entire sample is in fact representative. Now, this video so far has been going for 4 minutes and 32 seconds. The portion of it explaining oversampling is maybe a minute and a half of that. It would have been extremely easy for Donald Trump and his campaign or the conservative bloggers who support him to find out about this, but they're not interested in the facts. They're not interested in what oversampling actually means or how polling is actually done. What they're interested in doing is pushing a false narrative to farm the resentment that they already know is out there amongst their supporters and build support for business endeavors in the future, whether Trump TV or some other form of endeavor like that. The problem in this election overall is that almost nobody understands how polling actually works, whether they work for the Trump campaign or not. Polling is somewhat complex, but it's not as arcane as people make it out to be. And if you do a little bit of study, even on something as simple as Wikipedia, you can understand how polls are conducted. And you can learn very easily how to tell a poll that is scientific and reliable and an accurate representation of what the population actually believes on a topic is, versus something that is purely online or something like that. Polling is reliable. Polling can be trusted, not in every case, which is why we don't focus on one poll exclusively, but we take many of them and then combine it into an aggregate look at the population. It's just frustrating to see people who don't like what the polls show be willing to throw out the entire thing simply because they're not fans of the results. This is just one way that that's being done. But if you see conservatives, perhaps on social media, on your Facebook feed or on Twitter, pushing this false narrative about oversampling, you now are equipped to answer it. So, thank you for joining me. I know this is a bit of an academic, a bit of a nerdy approach to politics, but this sort of thing matters to me since I come from academia, and I want to make sure that all of us have the accurate information that we need to engage in politics and in this election in particular. Thanks for joining me, guys. I'll see you next time.